Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Leadership Tidbits with Coach T. Wilson. I am your host and leadership mentor, Tywauna Wilson. If this is your first time tuning in to our virtual learning laboratory called Leadership Tidbits, welcome. Come on in. Let me know where you are coming in from so that I can give you a proper introduction, so that I can welcome you in. And while you're coming in, share this broadcast out. As I always say, you might be the messenger for somebody else's need. You could be that key that will open up the door for somebody else who needs to hear this message. So make sure you share it out. Come on in. Let me know where you're coming in from, and you are in for a treat today. But before we get into our mentor, it's Tuesday. So you know what that means? Another episode of Elaborate Topics dropped today. So hopefully you have already downloaded it. It is an awesome episode, and it's talking about the power of negotiation. So making sure you have those skills to win in life, in business, and your career. So even if you are not a medical laboratory professional, I still think you need to hear that podcast. So it's Elaborate Topics on directimpactbroadcasting.com, or you can go to your favorite podcast platform. Also, wanted to let you know that our website got a refresh. So go over to trendyelitellc.com. We got a refresh. We got some awesome things over there for you. Some resources are over there. If you are interested in learning more about our courses, our programs, our coaching, like, you just need to go over there. Go on over, check it out. Let me know what you think, get connected. And so that's another awesome resource for you. If you are a medical laboratory science, make sure you sign up for the LabVine Summer Institute, the training that will be held the end of the month. So make sure you check it out. It's totally free. So go on over, check it out. And I want to make sure that you are in the building. So without further ado, let me bring on our mentor for tonight. Dr. Kate, how are you?
Hello, I am wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm super excited to have you here and to talk about this topic that's critical. I mean, as you know, my background is healthcare. So right now, burnout, overcoming burnout. I mean, burnout is real and we can see it. So I'm just excited to have you on and have you talk about that.
Yeah.
So before I let you take it away, I want to introduce you, but let's say hello to one of our guests. So we have Jeffrey. Hi, Jeffrey. So Jeffrey is chiming in from Huber Heights, Ohio, whoop, 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 which is not far from me. So that is awesome. Thank you, Jeffrey, for tuning in. And Kate, I didn't say where you are chiming in from. So
Yep.
we have mentors from all over, and you are joining us from
Wytheville, Virginia.
So Dr. Kate is coming in all the way from Virginia. I think you might be our first Virginia.
Well, there we go. Yeah, coming in from the Commonwealth. So
which is awesome. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Kate. So Dr. Kate Steiner is a burnout recovery strategist, consultant, speaker, and CEO of Lift Wellness Consulting. She supports professionals in overcoming the burden of burnout through a proven reflection and developmental process. Holding a master's of counseling and a PhD in counselor education and supervision, her practice is grounded in the research-based Steiner self-reflective sustainability and wellness, SSRSW model. published in the Oracle Research Journal. Okay, Dr. K. As a lifetime researcher in wellness and burnout, Dr. Steiner is the author of Feeling Crispy, a guide in burnout recovery, and host of the From Burnout to Recovery show with Dr. Kate. Her mission is to end the burnout cycle for professionals so they are living happier and healthier lives. So, Dr. Kate is in the building. I'm excited. So, you're going to be talking to us about embracing burnout so that we can flourish.
Definitely. Yes. So excited to be here with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can just see the slides and what I'm working with. So I really come from this concept of feeling crispy. And so feeling crispy is actually the verbiage that I use to describe my own burnout. So it comes with a bit of a visual in that aspect. So you may have or may not have seen the movie Christmas Vacation. But in that movie, and I see Coach T is kind of like, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. In that movie, there is a dinner scene. And the entire family has come together for this dinner, and they have all of the fixings out on the dinner table, all of the sides, and this beautifully roasted turkey. And Clark Griswold, who is the main character of the movie, and he really likes like grand gestures. And so he is really making a big deal out of this dinner because he's just so elated and proud that the entire family has come together. And he looks at Catherine, who is the person who prepared the turkey, and he says, Catherine, if this, turkey tastes half as good as it looks, we're all in for a really big treat. And he kind of raises the fork and the knife up above his head, and he kind of does this dun 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 dun, and he goes and he slices into this turkey, and it just explodes in steam. Just looks a little something like this. There is nothing left of this poor bird except for that crispy, crispy skin. And that for me is my burnout. When I am experiencing burnout, I am working so hard to keep it together on the outside. But if someone were to cut just under my skin, I would explode in that steamy mess. And really, the bottom line is we cannot avoid burnout. It is something that is a part of our human condition. And I have my own experience with that as well. So my work and really digging into, the aspects of burnout recovery really stemmed from my own experience with burnout. And this was about 10 years ago. And I was finishing up the coursework for my PhD program. I was working on a college campus with predominantly fraternity and sorority students at the time. So I had lots of nights, lots of weekend hours, and I was in a really unhealthy relationship. And all of these things combined, life felt hard. And I wasn't happy, and I could access anger and sadness really easily, but joy and any excitement, any other emotions came really hard to me. But I would snap at people, and I just didn't enjoy who I was being. I really felt that I had become the worst version of myself. And I found that I spent that time saying things like, if I can just get to the end of the day, I'll have some time to rest. If I can just get to the end of the week, then I have some downtime. If I can just get this project finished, then I'll have some downtime. I'll have some time to rest. I'll recover then. If I can just get to the end of the semester, if I can just get to the end of the month, if I can just get to that vacation day, if I can just get to that holiday. I'm not sure how many of you are connecting with this, but how many of you have said something to the effect of, if I can just get to. And the bottom line is when we're already in that place, when we're saying, if I can just get to, we're already in a state of burnout. So I mentioned that burnout is unavoidable. And that really comes down to our human anatomy and how we respond to stress in our body. So we all have when something happens and we feel threatened, it creates a stress response, which then results in fight, flight, freeze, or flop. within our body. And so we have that trigger, that stressor, that gives us associated thoughts. We assign meaning to it. Those meanings become emotions, and that emotion becomes a physical response or a reactive behavior. And this is the cycle that we go through whenever we have one of these stressors come up in our life. And this is part of what creates burnout for ourselves because we respond to that snarky email the same way we would respond to a tiger chasing us in that aspect. So, really, kind of that aspect. And so, we are always often in this heightened, stressed state where it's really hard to recover in between these moments. And I actually call these moments burn events. So, burn events are circumstances, activities, interactions with difficult people, things that happen in our lives daily that lead us to feel emotionally drained, exhausted, or overwhelmed. And there are two types. There are those that are expected. So these are the connections that we can look to our calendar and actually know that they're coming up for us. It might be a travel week for work. It may be a large scale project or a big launch that we're working on. That we know it's just going to take a little bit more time for us, that we're going to feel exhausted or overwhelmed or fatigued following that event, but we know and we can plan for it by looking at the calendar. We know that it's coming. There are also the unexpected burn events. These are the things that catch us a little off guard. It may be that surprise news about a project, or maybe something that you had delegated didn't get done, and it is critical to have things finished by the deadline that you have. And so those are the unexpected things that catch us a little more off guard. Now, the reason that recognizing these burn events is so important is what we do, and as part of our stress cycle, is we'll have a burn event and then we push through. And we have another burn event and we push through that. And then we have a burn event and a burn event and a burn event, and we continue to push through and push through and push through until our mind or our body, and often both, stop us. We get sick, we get incredibly overwhelmed, we have that kind of breakdown moment. And they often happen at times that it's just not opportune. Never happens when it's like, oh, this is a great time for me to get really sick in this regard. And so we've pushed ourselves through. So burnout is really the result of several burn events from which we have not recovered. So when we don't spend the time recovering in between our burn events, it results in full-on burnout. Now, full-on burnout is really categorized by a few things. And that's when we're no longer able to find the joy or passion or connection with our work, or this could be as part of an activity. So one thing that I like to talk to people about is that burnout doesn't necessarily show up only in career-related circumstances. It could be a part of a volunteer position. It could be part of being a board member for an organization. It could be a part of being a parent or in a relationship. So it's that loss of joy within that work or activity. It's the feeling that work or activity is unmanageable. So you wake up in the morning and you think, gosh, I don't even know where to start because this just feels like it's too much. So that feeling of unmanaging. And then it starts to feel as though it's a burden. So it just feels hard. Getting to a task feels hard. Completing a task feels hard. Getting through a task feels hard. And you kind of almost have this sense of like, well, I don't want to in that aspect. So these three things really kind of lend itself and help us know where we are in terms of burnout. Now, one of the things that we want to think about in burnout is how do we define that for ourselves? So when you start to feel that overwhelm, when you start to feel that exhaustion, or that things are unmanageable, that things are a burden, that you've lost the joy, we all have words that describe this for ourselves. Mine is feeling crispy, and I welcome you to continue to use that as you go forward in your life, if that feels good to you in that aspect. But what are some of the words that you might use to describe your burnout? Some of the words that I've heard from other people are just exhaustion, done, absolutely done. Like just can't, I can't do anymore. Just extreme fatigue, tired, overwhelmed. So, really thinking about how do you define those words for yourself. Now, the recognition piece is a part of the model that I utilize that supports us in building resiliency when we embrace burnout. So, if we can't avoid burnout, what do we do when we experience it? So, this model that I created through my dissertation research really is grounded in the aspects of self reflection. So it's a piece where you kind of figure out for yourself what works best, and you continue to reflect through this process or through these three phases of observation, preparation, and recovery. So, observation is really that piece where we define what burnout looks like for ourselves. We want to understand how it shows up for us physically. So, how does it show up in our body? Do you get headaches? Do you have stomach issues? Do you have weird food cravings? Is sleep harder or do you want to sleep more? Maybe it impacts your water intake or you have muscle aches. So, what are some of the ways that it shows up for you physically within your body? You also want to consider how does it show up for you emotionally? So, what are the emotions that you're able to tap into? I know for myself, when I am feeling burned out or I've just experienced a burn event, I really can only access anger or sadness. Other emotions are really hard for me to come by and to access and tap into. So how does that show up for you emotionally? It may be that fatigue. Physically and kind of emotionally both kind of shows up as like foggy headedness or not being able to gather our thoughts. So, really thinking about how that shows up for us. And that observation piece is important because that helps us identify when burnout or burn events are happening in our lives. And the faster that we're able to name them and identify them, the faster that we're able to implement preparation if they're going to come around again, or recovery when we are in that state so that we can get back to that happiest, healthiest state. The other piece with observation is looking at those expected burn events. So we want to identify those by looking ahead at our calendar and thinking what might be a burn event, might be a time where I'm going to be a little more stressed, and how might I prepare for that a little bit differently? And that leads us into the phase of preparation. So, preparation, we really want to think about what are our expected burn events. So, what are the things that we can identify as being high stress times? And how might we go into them a little bit differently? How do we want to think about our different aspects of wellness when we're going into those times? Do we need to do something differently for our physical wellness? So, how we move our body, what we put into our body, how we sleep. Maybe it's your water intake. I know that that's a big one for me. When I have more high stress times, I know that if I up my water intake, I feel better throughout the day. I tend to have more energy throughout the day, as well as making sure that I'm getting enough sleep during those times. The other aspect with preparing for your expected burn events is having planned recovery immediately following those burn events. So if you have a meeting that you know is going to be stressful, create some time for yourself immediately following that meeting so that you can have a moment to ground down or have a recovery practice. So maybe you're going to do some deep breathing. Maybe you're going to take a walk. Maybe you're going to talk to a friend and vent to them about what was going on during that meeting. Maybe you're going to do some journaling or reflection about that, listing out, maybe you'll list out your resentments from that or do a gratitude list of what you learned during that time. But you want to have a plan of how you're going to recover immediately following those events. If it's a really long week, maybe it's taking a day to, watch Hallmark movies. That might be what I do. You may choose a different activity, but you want to have that preparation. The other piece that's really important as part of the preparation phase is setting your boundaries. So you want to figure out and know what your non-negotiables are. So what are things that you need day to day, week to week, month to month to be able to access and be your happiest, healthiest self? So what does that look like? What does that look like in terms of setting boundaries with other people? And what does that look like when you have to set expectations or work standards for yourself? So what are some of the expectations that you have for yourself as part of that? Now, when it comes to work standards and those self expectations, a couple of things that I always like to highlight for folks are, what does your opening routine look like when you step into your workspace? And what does your closing routine look like when you're stepping out of your workspace? So, how do you open your day? And I think this comes from my days of really being in the service industry and waiting tables and bartending and hosting, because we always had opening and closing routines in the restaurant. And so there was a specific way that we opened up the restaurant. There were specific tasks that we did. And that always helped frame my mindset into switching from, okay, personal Kate to worker Kate in that aspect. But we also had ways that we also closed down the restaurant so that it was prepared for the next day and the next person who was going to be on shift. So you want to think about, how are you putting into place those routines that help you transition from one aspect of your life into another aspect of your life. The important thing with boundaries that we always have to remember is that it's not a boundary until we actually communicate it with another person. So we want to make sure that we're not holding unmet expectations, because an unspoken expectation will be an unmet expectation. So when we don't share our expectations with others, we have no way of holding them accountable to them, because they can't possibly know how we expected to be treated in that moment. So when we share our boundaries, when we share our expectations, we're doing people the favor of teaching them how we are wanting to be treated. So that's an important piece to that. The last phase is recovery. So recovery is really that aspect of, how do we get back from the state of feeling burned out back to the state of feeling our best self or our happiest, healthiest self within that moment, and what that looks like? And I really want folks to understand that this is something that is created in small steps throughout the day. So it may not be that you have a long period of time at the end of the day that you use for recovery, but rather maybe you have a couple of times throughout the day that you're spending 2 to 5 minutes doing some small practices for recovery. So, for example, one of those small practices is incorporating play into your day. So just being playful throughout your day and having fun actually creates recovery for you. So we don't play nearly enough as adults. And play is something that is actually incredibly important for us as we develop problem solving skills. It helps us learn, it helps us be more creative, it reduces stress, and ultimately it's fun. So you want to be playful. So, for example, some of the ways that I play in my life are having a dance party, or singing to my dog and my cat really, really terrible songs. I'm not getting a record deal anytime. And I make them up usually on the spot and just sing to them. Or I just sing about random things that I'm doing in my house. It might be a game that you really like to play. It may be, connecting and laughing with your partner. But there are lots of ways that we can incorporate play into our world. Another thing that I love to include as part of small steps and micro steps in our recovery is the comfort list. So, the comfort list is a list of things, items, activities, songs, foods, drinks, anything that brings you that immediate sense of calm, kind of a sense of peace. It comforts you, it brings your stress down. So, for example, some of the things that are on my comfort list are mac and cheese. It's my number one comfort item. I have it at least once a week in some way, shape, or form. I also really enjoy getting hugs from people, playing with my dog and the cat, watching those Hallmark movies, using maybe not right now, it's kind of warm out, but in the winter, I love a nice cozy sweater or some fuzzy socks. It may be spending a little time outside in my hammock, maybe reading a chapter of a book. So these are small things that you can implement pretty quickly to help comfort you when you are in a stressed state. Grounding exercises is another great way to incorporate recovery throughout your day, often using a breathing exercise of some kind. One of the ones that is my favorite is box breathing, which is a guided breathing pattern where you inhale for 4 counts, you hold for 4 counts, you exhale for 4 counts, and then you hold for 4 counts. And I usually draw the box with it. So it's inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 1, 2, 3, 4, exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 1, 2, 3, 4. And you repeat that 3 to 5 times until you start to feel your stress lessen and your heart rate reduce, and you're back to that state where you can be a little more thoughtful in thinking after you've gotten into a heightened state of that aspect. So you really want to think about, what does recovery look like for you? And then you want to plan it into your day. So you want to make sure that you are creating time for yourself and your recovery throughout your day, whether you are putting that on your calendar or setting a reminder in your phone, but something to remind you just to take a pause to implement a recovery practice throughout your day is a way to micro step it so you don't get overwhelmed and so you don't get into that push through cycle where you're having burn event after burn event and just pushing through until your body tells you to stop. So while we cannot avoid burnout, we absolutely can embrace this human experience. And through observation, preparation, and recovery, we can address burnout in a different and more resilient way. I have a goal to help support people into living a full life, but not a busy life, meaning that you have a deliciously full life, but you never feel busy or overwhelmed by it. I do have a free resource to offer if you are interested. It is a burnout reflection journal. And so you can find that on my website, which I know we're going to get into in that aspect. But I want to thank you so much for your time today. Please know that I am happy to be a continued resource for you in burnout recovery.
Dr. Kate, that's awesome. I mean, you brought up so many good tips and good points because, like I said before, being in healthcare, I
Mhm.
know that it's like continuous burnout, and it
Yes,
seems like there's no relief in sight.
right.
So I think some of the tips that you gave, I think, are very helpful. So I like that your model of the observation, preparation, recovery, and that planned burnout. So when you know you are going to experience a burn event, making sure that
Mhm.
you plan that recovery. I thought
Yeah.
that was awesome. And then setting your boundaries. So this one made me chuckle a little bit because it's easy to say I have boundaries, but you said it's not a boundary until you share it with others. So
Yes. Yeah, and I think we've all been in that. I know I've definitely been in that place where I'm like, it's like, but they didn't meet my expectations. And then I'm like, wait a second, did I actually share with them what I wanted? And then I'm like, oh, I didn't. Okay. Well, so I need to change that.
absolutely. And then the box breathing. I've heard about that a few
Mhm.
times. So I think that was great that you mentioned that again, that technique.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites. I also really like the 5 4 3 2 1 method for grounding, which is utilizing all 5 of your senses and kind of just the space around you. So you start with a nice big deep breath, and then you name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste, and really kind of describe each of those things through, in your mind, and then ending with a nice, a second big cleansing breath is another way to just kind of slow that stress response.
Nice. So, viewers, if you have questions for Dr. Kate, make sure you drop those into the chat so that we can discuss those points. And if there were takeaways that you have, make sure you drop those in the chat as well. So, Dr. Kate, I know that, during your time of going through school and
Mhm.
running your practice, I'm sure that you had many burn events. Can you talk to us a little bit about, and I know you talked through some of your strategies, but just thinking about the whole planning each day and how you are maneuvering so that you can be helpful for other people as well.
Yeah. So, one of the strategies that I have in place, even if it's a day where I'm not necessarily anticipating a lot of burn events, but knowing that maybe some of those unexpected things might come up, I do have planned recovery for myself throughout the day. And these are really like 2 to 5 minute breaks that I will utilize. I'll either do a grounding exercise. I tend to go to breathing. Breathing exercises is what really helps me. For some people, it might be, an experience where using like touch, or I've definitely recommended for folks like just stopping and giving yourself like a hand massage,
Mhm.
just so you're kind of getting that sensation in that aspect is a good way of stopping, or making a really quick gratitude list in that aspect. I also, have worked with folks where it's like maybe gratitude is harder to, connect to in that moment. So what you really need to do is release some resentments. So writing down all of the things that are like those ruminating thoughts, the things that are keeping you up at night, the worries that you're having, writing those all down, and then taking that piece of paper and ripping it up, and with each rip saying the words I am done or this is done until you are satisfied with the ripping. And then you can throw them away, you can burn them safely, in a safe manner, please. I've had some people joke with me, like, I got kicked out of my office because I burned paper in there. I'm like, okay, I gave you additional options. The other option is you can kind of soak them in a bowl of water, which is actually what I like, because I like to watch the ink actually like release off the paper. That's something that's really satisfying for me, when I'm just kind of watching like my resentments just kind of like dissolve off the paper and into the water and in a way. So that's another way that you can do that piece. And then I really think that it's important for everyone to not only have those opening and closing routines when it comes to work, but have some kind of opening routine for your day. So, how are you starting your day? And then a closing routine. So, how are you kind of closing out your day just before you go to bed at night? And that looks a little bit different for everyone, but it might include some reflection time. It may include journaling if that's something that works for you. It may include, meditation or working out. And that aspect at the end of the day is kind of, I like to list out the things that the wins, the things I want to celebrate throughout my day. And they don't have to be huge things. It can, simply be, I made the bed today. I fed myself today. I had dinner. I took care of my child. Like, my child is still alive at the end of the day. So celebrating those kinds of wins at the end of the day. And then remember that you can incorporate recovery practices really through activities that you're already doing. So one of the things that I do is I have a post-it note on my mirror that has some affirmations on it that I read while I brush my teeth. So while I'm brushing my teeth, I'm reading this note that says, I will be joyful, I will be calm, I will live an attitude of gratitude, I will do my work honestly. And that is just part of, something I'm going to be doing anyway, but also adds that extra piece of just kind of bringing me that calm throughout my day and just setting up my mind as I go into the day.
I like that of setting up your mind and celebrating those small wins. I
Mhm.
think is to me is critical, but sometimes is easily forgotten.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like people are refreshed when they do celebrate those wins?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have found that in working with when I've worked with clients, they feel refreshed, especially the next day when they celebrate those wins. Most of my clients, I will start with, they start their first couple of weeks, they start their days with the resentment list. So they actually create a resentment with any of the thoughts that they're waking up with that they don't want to carry into their day with them. And that is something that a lot of people have found a lot of success with. And they find that they are able to, once they start releasing those, they start to release them kind of more automatically. And then they start to find that they're not waking up with those thoughts anymore. So they're kind of celebrating their wins at the end of the day. If they have any resentments that they wake up with, they've released them pretty quickly. And then they're able to tap into kind of gratitude and the celebration throughout the day a little bit easily because those thoughts aren't holding them back.
Got it. So a resentment list.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I'm learning new stuff every day. So I'm enjoying this conversation. So viewers, if you have picked up on some additional nuggets, make sure you drop those in the chat and share those with us. Dr. Kate, we hear a lot about burnout. We also hear a lot about stress. Are they one and the same? Are they different? What's your take on it? Because sometimes I hear them used interchangeably and sometimes they're not. So curious to hear your thoughts about it.
I think a lot of people use them interchangeably. The difference that I think I distinguish between burnout and stress is that stress and stressors are really what I consider to be those burn events. So those smaller aspects that cause kind of that overwhelm and recovery. And the difference in that is that, you know, when we recognize them within that moment and then implement some small recovery there, that creates space to support us in not going into that full on burnout. So I think that's the bit of the difference for me. So we have stress in our daily lives and that occurs, but burnout is really something that is more chronic and is really impacting our ability to be able to like show up in our work or in the day.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So when it starts affecting your ability to show up in your work in the day, what would you say to those healthcare workers that it was started off as stress, but now it is burnout, and each and every day they are burnt out due to numerous reasons, whether it's short staffing, whether it's taking care of patients and the pandemic and COVID and monkeypox is now going around and all these different things, but they still have to keep showing up each and every day to care for somebody else, but it doesn't appear as though help is on the way. So what would you say for people that, you know, are in these situations where they are undergoing ongoing chronic burnout?
Yeah. It's tough because often we think about that in an aspect of like, oh, if I can, you know, if I can simply get like a big chunk of time away, I'll have some time to recover and come back to this. But the reality is that they're going to come back to the same environment, even if they were able to get that time away. And so it's really about creating new habits in implementing those small micro steps throughout the day to implement those spaces of recovery. So thinking about some small ways that they can incorporate, you know, some playfulness into their daily life. What are some small steps that they can do in that aspect to bring out that enjoyment? Where are some small spaces that they can access gratitude or do some grounding practices or having, you know, implementing kind of that opening routine or a closing routine so that they're kind of transitioning from, you know, that work part of their life into that personal space in their life in that aspect. And I think that, you know, really overwhelmed healthcare workers and those kind of things, I think utilizing their resentment list is actually a really great way of kind of finding some space because that there's so much happening. You're taking on the emotions of so many other people that you have to find some ways to release that. And certainly I think seeking professional help is something that I would highly recommend in those situations because this is going to be something that's challenging to do on your own. When I had my own burnout experience, like true burnout experience 10 years ago, I struggled to get out of it on my own. And I spent probably about a year struggling with that before I went and saw a professional counselor. And once I was seeing someone, a professional, to really help me kind of name those patterns and establish some new habits and have that accountability, I started to feel better within a couple of weeks.
Wow. So establishing those patterns and working with
Mhm.
somebody that can help you feel better.
Yeah.
So we probably have some people that's listening to or viewing this broadcast, and they might be in that state of, I'm not sure if it's stress or I'm not sure if
Mhm.
I'm burnt out. What could be some of those signs that they could be experiencing a burnout event or going through burnout?
Mhm. Yeah. So if they're really not, if you're not sure if you're really kind of in more in a burnout state or just kind of experiencing lots of stress or lots of burn events, you really want to think about, are you, when you think about the week as a whole, are you waking up more days of the week than not feeling as though, you don't, that work is unmanageable or that work is a burden or that you no longer have the joy for those works. And once you start to get into the space of like more days of the week than not, you're feeling those feelings, you're probably closer to burnout or in burnout in that aspect.
Okay, got it. Wow. That was good, Dr. Kate. So if you are watching this or listening to the replay and you think you could be experiencing a burn event or burnout, then you could try some of the techniques that Dr. Kate talked about, or you might have to have a counselor help you walk through that process so that you can navigate it uh, more quickly and more effectively. So I thought that
Awesome.
was good. So, Dr. Kate, you said you like to read books, you like to be on
Mhm.
your hammock, and you like to read books. I'm an avid reader. So, what are you reading? What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, so right now I'm reading some stuff on the Enneagram because I'm very intrigued by that aspect, and I'm doing some workshops work with that specifically for college student audiences and their how that translates to their leadership personality. So reading a little bit about that. And then I really enjoy, as far as fiction goes, I really enjoy kind of some like fantasy aspect. If I can read about like vampires or fairies or something to that effect,
Hmm.
witches, I love that kind of genre.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I'm always looking for something to, not just personal development books, but
Mhm.
also some books where I can take my mind off of, whatever might be happening each and every
Yes,
day. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
That that's awesome. So as I bring different mentors on from all around the world, I always like to ask, how do you keep yourself developed? So a
Mhm.
big thing here, and one of the reasons why I even started this podcast is because I'm very huge on personal development. And I think for some people, and me included, some of your first mentors, you might find them in a book, you might find
Mhm.
them listening to a podcast, or you might find them here on social media in a venue such as this. And so you can learn something from anybody. And so what
Mhm.
do you do to keep yourself filled with knowledge, with different tools, with where do you get your knowledge and energy and development?
Yeah, a lot of that comes from reading for me. So, utilizing, book recommendations from other folks. I am an avid signer upper for courses. So, I love going into like an online course and being a part of that. And I would say probably the number one way that I stay on top of my own development is by participating in masterminds, or so connecting with other folks and having those conversations, dialogues, people who are also kind of in that same development process. So maybe they're in a similar course that I am taking or have signed up for, or maybe they might just be friends who are also speakers and coaches, and so getting together with them and having those conversations and kind of just talking through what are some of the pitfalls or celebrations that we have. And that is a great space for me to learn more.
I love it. So those of you who are watching or listening, know that you will be a lifelong learner. You might have your degree and that's awesome, but the learning doesn't stop. You find learning in books and podcasts and
Mhm.
mastermind groups and that collective learning. I love a good mastermind
Yes.
group. Because it's important to get around people who think like you and that don't think like you. And you like, you know
Absolutely.
what? I never thought about it like that. So I love that. So before we get to where it's almost time to come to a close, I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to let the viewers get and stay connected with you. But first, Jeffrey said, thank you. So thank you, Dr. Kate.
Well,
Appreciate us for
thank
this. And
you.
we'll definitely try to use some of these tips. Thank you, Jeffrey. So I'm with you. Dr. Kate was awesome. I think these were great tips. And I say because I'm in the lab space and thinking about this as I work with people that
Mhm.
are experiencing burnout each and every day, but also for our educators. It's the
Mhm.
same thing. Now it's time for school to
Yes.
start. And it's like, oh my goodness, for some of them, they are already experiencing that
Mhm.
stress and that, upcoming burn event, just getting ready
Yes.
to educate our children. So I think the tips that you shared were awesome. And I'll make sure I'll
Thank you.
share it with all of my village because I think it's important.
Mhm.
So, how can people get and stay connected with you? And I know you talked about it before, but I want to give you another opportunity to give your website, give your social media,
Yeah.
or just how can people stay connected with you? Your podcast handle.
Yeah. So social media, you can find me at Dr. Kate Steiner and on all of the major social media places. So Instagram, Twitter. The Facebook group is under Lift Wellness Consulting with Dr. Kate. And my website is liftwellnessconsulting.com, which is where you can find access to the podcast, access to the Burnout Recovery Journal that I shared as a free resource, and lots of other tips and tricks there too.
Awesome. So make sure you go on over to Dr. Kate's website, liftwellnessconsulting.com. I'm getting ready to jack it up here.
It's a mouthful, yes.
Go over there, get your burnout journal. You'll be able to find when she's on the air and releasing new episodes so that you can continue to get some of these tips that she shared with us today. Very helpful. So it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what your background is, but burnout is real. It's affecting everybody, and understanding how to minimize it when you have these burnout events, planning your recovery. So I really love that whole that opening routine and closing routine,
Mhm.
setting your boundaries and making sure you have accountability with that.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed the discussion tonight. And I would say before we wrap up, Dr. Kate, what are the one or two tidbits that you would like to leave the viewers with so that they can take action right away? So I'm big on content is great, getting information is great, but it's only powerful when you apply it. And
Yes.
so what are the one or two tidbits that you would share where people can take away and start to
Mhm.
implement right away?
Yeah. So the one thing I always like to highlight, and again, is that piece that burnout is unavoidable and it is something that we all experience. So really I like to say that because I want to do what we can to remove the shame that comes along with burnout. So when we get into this hustle culture, I think we think that, oh, I'm not supposed to experience this, and we all do. So that that first piece. So just know that you are a normal human when you are experiencing this burnout. The really key concept that I think that is important and something that everyone can implement right now is looking at your calendar and identifying your upcoming burn events. So what are the things that you need to prepare for differently, and really think about what it is you need to put in place so that you can show up in a better mindset for those burn events. And then as you're looking at your calendar, schedule that recovery time immediately following those burn events. Go ahead and schedule it now, and schedule it as though you are scheduling time with the most important person in your life, because you are scheduling it with the most important person in your life. That's you.
That's good. So pull out your phone, pull out your calendar, your planner, whatever you use, your wall calendar, and look at it and see when you might have an upcoming burn event and plan for that. And then plan for that recovery. I think that's great, because a lot of times we know, like, oh my goodness, this next week is going to be crazy. And I think getting ahead of it and giving yourself some tools and some grace too to maneuver that, I think is important.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Kate Steiner, this was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great delight.
Well, thank you for showing up and sharing with my audience and being our mentor tonight. I learned so much, and grateful. I'm really grateful for the strategies that you shared with us, and I'll make sure that I share it with my tribe and my village, because it's something that impacts each and every one of us. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, viewers. Our time has come to a close. We'll be back next week, same time, same channel, with another amazing mentor. Make sure you share this broadcast out with somebody who could benefit from it, and tune in next week to hear from another amazing mentor. And until next time, my friends, I hope you have an amazing day.